הפרק האחרון שלנו לפני ההפסקה תהיה שיחה משולשת בהשתתפות ניל גורנפלו, שכבר הכרתם, פליז. פרופסור שיזף רפאלי, ראש המחקר לחקר האינטרנט באוניברסיטת חיפה, ומי שתוביל את השיחה, ולרי ברכיה, עמיתת מחקר ממכון ירושלים לחקר ישראל, שעיתונאי הסביבה ואני בתוכם עוד זוכרים ומכירים אותם משנים ארוכות מאוד של עבודה במשרד להגנת הסביבה. כותרת השיחה, העיר הדיגיטלית וכלכלת שיתוף, מי מרוויח ומה משתבש. בבקשה, ולרי.
Okay, Neil, you already know because you already heard him speak. I'm going to say another word about Shizaf because we've had the pleasure of having Shizaf with us last year, and I'm guessing that many of you were with us last year, and you remember perhaps that Shizaf introduced us to the digital world with phrases like, we must understand that the world is moving from atoms to bits, and that organization or institutional structures are moving from cathedrals to bazaars. And we're very much in line with and trying to understand what are the implications of digital society on consumption behavior and consumption patterns. So Shizaf, can you take us for the first question, where are we going in digital society, and why is it so important to understanding consumer behavior and lifestyles?
There are a number of dimensions, two of which you've already mentioned, the motion from physical to virtual, that is from tangible things to their representation. And in all those occasions and locations where that can happen, it will happen or already is happening. The other one is the change in hierarchies that you mentioned, the motion from cathedrals to bazaars. A third is something Neil mentioned earlier today, and that was his label of moving from consumer to prosumer. I think we should, especially in light of the conversation that just held place here 10 minutes ago, we should add a couple more dimensions. We should pay attention, I think we should pay deep attention to the issue of numbers. There was some mention of whether the communities that share should be larger. That was a suggestion of two speakers today. Or maybe following the experience of the kibbutz and following Edna's question from 5 minutes ago, maybe you can only get sharing in communities that are small enough to cultivate trust and so forth. Question of size, critical mass, Dunbar's number, and a glass ceiling or a glass floor is very important. And I think maybe most important and not mentioned yet today is the notion of wisdom of crowds. We're striving towards sharing because there's this sense that the community knows more than individuals in the community, that some smart way of aggregating knowledge, intentions, needs, desires, and assets, some smart way of aggregating these things might bring about added value beyond that which resides in individuals, even the most brilliant of individuals. That's the background of the kibbutz movement that Edna referred to. That's the background of anyone whose vision is to share under community circumstances. The digital technology makes such sharing possible. It also makes the threats to sharing more possible. It also makes the centrifugal forces that will pull apart some of the sharing, enables them as well. Let me just add one last sentence and say that in a digital world, we have an opportunity to design the mechanism, an opportunity that we, in historic times, had a lot less of. We have an opportunity to actually architecturally state what sorts of relationships we'd like to have between people. And so when commerce or production, industry, or politics, any form of social relations take place in the digital society, they are much more than ever pre-designed, maybe much less than ever organic, and in any case, much more predetermined.
Neil, when you see the development of the sharing economy platforms, the big ones and the smaller ones, are they helping us to build communities? Are they all coming in and joining people together? Or are they just providing another business model that's exploiting the possibility of the digital society and digital mobile devices?
Yeah, this is where the question of the purpose of the of an organization or purpose of a business and its structure is really the sort of litmus test. Okay, so most of the sharing economy companies that we talk about are not social enterprises, and they're not chartered to have social impact. This is not what they're designed to do. They're controlled by a small number of people and funded by a small number of people. And the purpose of the organization isn't actually even to turn profit, but to return a gigantic sort of windfall to investors, whether the company is profitable or not. That's not oftentimes not a consideration. So if we want the sharing economy to have the impact that we need it to have in the social, environmental, and economic dimensions, then it has to be designed specifically to have those impacts. Otherwise, it's a pipe dream. We're not going to get what society needs. Some investors may get what they need. Some founders may get what they need, right? So this is in the States. There's been we've been at a forefront of talk at Shareable. Been at the forefront of talking about the sharing economy, and then it evolved into something that we were really kind of, in a way, a little surprised at how big and central of a story it became, how much venture capital flowed into these companies, and what has happened as a result is a kind of backlash against them, a very large amount of criticism and dialogue, and also a counter movement. December, we published a story, Owning is the New Sharing, covering the development of sharing economy companies that were sharing the ownership and decision-making or decision-making with the users, with the people that create the value. And so this is the next wave of development. And there are already some working examples like Fairmondo, like Stocksy, that they're cooperatives, but they're digital businesses at the same time.
Shizaf, we saw that from the surveys of who uses the sharing economy, we see that the users are very predominantly millennials, that is the Y generation, 18 to 35-year-olds, and we see that they come from the higher educated, higher income section of the young society. They are the main users and who are active and digital society and digital people. But if we think about who the sharing economy could serve and who could really benefit from the sharing economy, we'd like to add that there are another two groups who really could benefit from that. That would be seniors who are living longer lives and they're maybe alone, who maybe want to be more engaged, who socially want to be in society that's important to them. And there's another group. Why is it always coming in on the most affluent? Surely the people who would most benefit from them are maybe the less affluent, and maybe affordability could come in together with sustainability and sharing economy. But that's not happening.
Yet. I reserve the right to remain optimistic. I think you're absolutely right. Generally speaking, innovation is pounced upon first by the young, the better off, the more well-to-do people. Generally, innovation is looked at suspiciously by older people, those who have more to lose, those who have more to learn. In the lingo of innovation, there's much talk of digital immigrants versus digital natives, and therefore it's not surprising that those who feel more comfortable with a tablet in their hand or a mouse in their hand will be the first to experiment with technologies, will be the first to adopt, sign up, make use, join the movement. It's been the case with pretty much any innovation, any technological invention, any social change, and it's not surprising in that case. But I think you're absolutely right. The question is not who starts, the question is who ends up using it most heavily and who ends up being most affected. And on this diffusion of innovation or adoption curve that looks at who in the long run will be using technology, so in the first decade, the first users were of, for example, washing machines, were not necessarily those who really needed them. The first users of the telephone were not necessarily those who needed them. But if we're looking at gaps to bridge, if we're looking at changes that can be made, if we're looking at leaps that could be performed, then you're absolutely right. The elderly, maybe the poor, certainly some of the people living in periphery or in urban blight areas stand to gain more from the sharing economy, and therefore it is the responsibility of regulators and of innovators, and I think the opportunity for startups, no less, to address those. The diffusion curve, as represented by the Gaussian or normal curve of distribution, tells us that we're way past the initial innovators. We're way past the first adopters. We're now into the mainstream, and once we're into the mainstream, we should therefore look at the impacts of sharing opportunities, shared bicycles or shared equipment libraries, shared information or shared education. All of these shared opportunities should now address other opportunities. To go back to a question that was asked earlier about the communal settlements and here in Israel and lessons from them. Of course, they were agrarian and rural and not urban. One of their failures was that they remained an elite. One of their failures was exactly your question, that they failed to address the larger masses and therefore became less relevant as time went by. So absolutely, if this new wave of revolution is to succeed, it will have to succeed in much wider swaths of population and not just be for the yuppies.
So Neil, do you see the platforms that are, and the apps that are coming in over the years, do you see that we are getting mainstream? Do you see that there are apps that are now going beyond the millennial group and getting to other parts of society? And are these apps, are these platforms succeeding? Because as I understand it, there is an extremely high death rate of the sharing platforms, and it is not a high proportion that in the end manage to succeed. So could you perhaps give us an idea of how they're going into mainstream, who is in fact managing to catch the wider user population, and what are the elements or characteristics of platforms that succeed and survive?
Yeah, in the United States, there's good evidence that some of the major platforms have gone mainstream, and for sure the idea has, and just to add, it is true that early adopters tend to be the better educated and resourced and better able to experiment and try new things, and startups know this, and they target profitable customers. So again, it's not their charter to necessarily serve everyone, right? They're highly motivated to serve the most profitable customers, the ones that return over and over again, that have disposable income, that have ready access to technology, that are already doing well. And so, in order to reach the population that may need these type of services more, you have to make a deliberate effort, which is costly, which bears a cost that these companies may not be willing to bear, and because they don't have a social mission, they're only looking at a profit. So that's that really drives a lot of the behavior.
Certainly.
One more point about the social distribution of those affected by sharing. One of the biggest promises of the digital economy generally, and sharing digital economy in particular, was a promise, maybe a pipe dream, of leaping over the intermediator. Some of the savings that have been promised and are promised are cutting the middleman out of the process and maybe sharing the spoils of that action between the producers and the consumers. So a vision or a promise used to be, let's disintermediate. Let's do away with the mediator. And when you do away with the mediator, several things happen. Maybe the most important from the point of view of the visionaries is that there are spoils to be shared among those who remain in the picture. Well, in point of fact, what happens in the digital economy is not so much disintermediation. In point of fact, what does happen in the digital economy, even in the sharing digital economy, is a very rapid and forceful re-intermediation, an appearance of huge new mediators that might be cutting an even bigger share of the cake than ever before. And we heard echoes of that right here 20 minutes ago. So if it's disintermediation or re-intermediation in the bigger picture is part of the answer to the question, will this benefit those we really want this to benefit?
So I'm going to carry on and ask you we have here, we're sitting here and in our audience, we have a mixture of people from academia and practitioners. And one of the problems of practitioners or of people coming to recommend a change of policy is they want evidence-based policy. They want to know what are the facts. They want to know why are you coming, what's your basis, why are you proposing something new, especially when you come with something that is a change of concept, a change of mindset. And I'm going to quote Dov Khanin, who I'm very happy is with us here. Dov Khanin said when we started talking about sustainability, he said it's not just doing better what you do, change the diskette. You said it's a mind change, a change of mindset. It's very difficult to change the mindset of policymakers. And do we actually have evidence-based today that we can come to policymakers and say, we have an evidence base for the sharing economy, we have evidence based for its environmental impacts, we have evidence based for its economic impacts, we have evidence based for its social impacts. This is what we suggest you do. And if we don't have evidence-based, what do you want the policymakers to do in a situation that we don't have good evidence for what we are proposing? And maybe Neil too?
Well, if any generation ever had evidence, it's ours. We live in an era of big data. Let me qualify the word we. This is an era of big data. I think anyone who asks whether regulators have evidence to base their decision needs to ask whether the regulators have access to big data, have the literacy necessary to make use of it, have the tools that access it at their side. And I'm afraid to say those regulators that I meet have too little of that. So while we have an abundance of big data about shared issues as well as about other issues, we have a poverty in the actual use. Evidence-based is a realization that I think most disciplines have already arrived at. Evidence is widely and deeply available, mostly thanks to the digital economy and their tools, and we're just on the cusp of making use of that. Evidence is what can be used and is used in many sharing opportunities, such as transportation and health and others. Evidence is what too often is being halted by too much regulation, oftentimes. For example, regulation about privacy, for example, regulation about halting or slowing down direct democracy opportunities and initiatives and so forth. But evidence is rooted in big data that we already have. The question is not whether we have it. The question is, will those who need to make use of it in short term? And that's in part our, in academia, responsibility to deal with. We need to teach. We're not teaching it well enough. We need to teach the new research methods in this area. We need to prepare decision makers to make use of these data. And in those areas where data is already being used, let me just mention 3 or 4 that I'm familiar with in what are called learning analytics in some educational opportunities, in publishing, in some publishing opportunities, in some governance areas. This is actually taking place. And it is, I think, some of the better, most interesting case studies and war stories of the digital sharing economy. Open source, access to data, making information that originally was public but has been held too close to the chest, making that available to everyone. Those are the great opportunities from the point of view of evidence.
And Neil, coming to you for the same question, but I'm going to add another dimension for you, is we have heard from you and from the other speakers. You're expecting local government to take the lead. You're hoping, and we're sitting here with many local government people taking the lead. Do we anticipate, do we see that it is the local governments who are the agents of change? They are leading the change agenda. Do we expect something from national governments? They are not here, incidentally, I would point out. They are not here. Do we expect something from Parliament? Well, we have a member of Parliament with us at the moment. Are we expecting it to come from communities themselves, from the business world? Who are the agents of change? Who are we expecting to lead the change? And that will be, unfortunately, our last question for this panel. Neil.
Yeah, so on the data issue, there are certain parts of the sharing economy that have been studied deeply. I hinted about it in car sharing, but shared mobility in general has been researched pretty extensively. So there's the Transportation Sustainability Research Center at UC Berkeley in California, and they've been studying shared mobility for about 15 years, I think, and bike sharing, car sharing, and then they've added, as new types of shared mobility have come on board, they've started studying those as well. And the research does show a positive impact. It does show the kind of impact that we're looking for in urban sustainability. And I think it's particularly relevant to Israel, where the public transit is still developing. There are a lot of roads and also some congestion, and a shared mobility approach I think could be a kind of fix until more public transit is put in. I think that seems like a very promising direction. And then in terms of who's leading, it's it depends on the city by city, situation by situation. In the example of Seoul, they clearly have been proactive. I think in general, cities, in terms of enabling a transition to a more fair, sustainable society, they are the leaders, but they are also very challenged by large sharing economy companies like Airbnb and Uber, who have big lobbying war chests and are very aggressive in their tactics. They strong arm local governments. And so this is why I wanted to bring such a strong message about being proactive, know what you want, have an agenda, have a framework, and work to get what you need out of the sharing economy, shape it to your ends.
Okay, thank you very much to Shizath Raffaeli and to Neil Gornflo.
You can stay please, because we have time for 1-2 questions. Okay. מישהו? אין? הערות? שאלות? בבקשה.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the very fascinating talking presentation by both of you. And I want to emphasize my question is the local governments being key agent of change. If I'm taking, for example, a person like Abe Klein, who was the Commissioner of Transportation first under Mayor Kennedy in Washington, D.C., then where he made the big change. I think that the focus is the involvement of the private sector and the public sector together, that you said being in your presentation, actually instead of competing with each other, this would be the main factor. The people, the political leadership like Abe Klein and mayors Rami Nano and effective together with actually combining the private and public sectors. I'm happy to hear your comments and thoughts about this.
Yeah, I think you're dead on right. I think that's really, in bike sharing, I think you're kind of referring to the bike share in Washington, D.C., which has been a smashing success. And bike sharing is a great example because, let's see, let's take the bike sharing in Denver, Colorado, where it's a nonprofit operator of the system. It's a for-profit company that provides the equipment. The government plays a role in making sure there's real estate available for the stands for the bikes. And then a healthcare system actually is one of the major funders of the system because they're looking for a positive health impact. So you have these actors working together to create a kind of public good, that's clearly like a very positive direction and good example.
One sentence, just to join the call for local government's involvement, but to not allow anyone else off the hook. I think all levels should be involved in shared economy, all the way down from international organizations, national governments, local communities, and families. At all of these levels, there's a role, there's an opportunity, and I don't think that focusing on one of these levels, Valerie, to your question, is in any way justified. It's a responsibility at all of these levels, and when I mean it, that it goes all the way from family to international organizations.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing too. There is a lot of leadership from the bottom up, from the commons. People coming together to solve their solutions without permission. And there. Some of the movements that we track on Shareable are very organic and they bubble up. Things like co-working started in San Francisco, 11 years ago, and it's become a global phenomenon. There's over 3,000 co-working spaces. Most of them are independent operated, and they have spread through replication. Just someone, in one town seeing someone else in another town doing it and saying, hey, I want to do that also, and that there's enough documentation and a model to follow that these ideas spread. And you see this kind of organic, instead of the sort of Silicon Valley model of impact through scale or reaching critical mass through scale. There is also another strategy for impact, which is through replication of local innovations becoming generalized, but just being started by local leaders, local community leaders all over the world.
Okay.
Can I just add, if I may add one point about what we found here of who's leading the agenda. And Shizath, you say they all should be leading and government should be involved and leading too. I noticed from Yoni's answer that he said the Ministry of Transport was not acting and had not started leading and involving on the transport side. May I also add that we have not managed to get either the Ministry of Environmental Protection to come in on this issue strongly, and they're not here. And we've not managed to get the Ministry of Economics. And when I approached the Ministry of Economics, then on the sharing economy, they said, "What's that?" So there's something missing somewhere in the public agenda, in the government agenda. It is happening on the ground. It is happening a bit in local authorities. We need some more agents of change.
Thank you very much. זה רק מזכיר לי... במסגרת יחסי האהבה ושיתוף הפעולה הפורים בין השלטון המקומי לשלטון המרכזי בישראל, שפעם ישבתי עם ראש עיר, די גדולה אפילו, ושאלתי אותו מה אתה מצפה בנושא מסוים, לא בכלכלה שיתופית, מהממשלה, אז הוא אמר, מהבוקר עד הלילה אני מצפה מהם דבר אחד, שלא יפריעו לי.